Now we're going to build a tail boom where we're going to combine the front tail rotor transmission with the tube drive, the tail boom itself, the tail boom support mechanism, and the push rod for the tail rotor servo. These are all the parts we'll need to build this. To get started, we need to insert the torque drive or the tube drive into the tail boom. The V2 tube drive has two bearings on it. Each one has a rubber bearing container which has to slide inside this tail boom. It's not going to do that very easily, so you need a lubricant. I use a silicone spray like this, spray the inside of the tail boom really well, and then spray each of the rubber pieces as well. Then you're just going to insert the tube drive in. You're going to have to work the rubber bearing cup a little bit around so that everything slides into it like so, and then you can push it in. And once it starts to push in, then you work the next piece of it as well, and then the whole thing will slide in. And you're going to have to do the same thing with the second one as well. You want to push the tube drive in until the ends that protrude are the same on both sides, about the same length. These are going to engage into the drives on the front tail rotor transmission as well as the tail boom. So now we're going to push the tail boom into the front tail rotor transmission. The tail boom has holes in it on both ends. There's two holes on each end. They're in the same spot, so it doesn't matter which end you try to use first. The transmission has a protrusion on each side that's going to go into these holes. So what you need to do is line up the tube drive into the receiver on the front transmission, and then line up that hole. Take the other half, and then it's going to drop over it like so. And then using the four spacers, push those in, and the front tail rotor transmission has been positioned on the tail boom like so. So the front transmission is going to get clamped around the tail boom, which is going to fully engage those protrusions into those holes. To put that on, V2 now has these spacers that go in the top for the gyro plate, and you'll need 4 lock nuts that go in the left hand side. There's recesses in here that will hold the bolts or the nuts correctly, and you're going to use 25mm bolts on the gyro plate. They're going to slip into these spacers. Like so, and then you're going to use 17mm bolts on the bottom, and you can fully tighten these. Alright, when this is done, you can see the gyro mount plate is installed, and this is all good and tight. Now we're going to focus on getting the tail rotor push rod ready to go. You need to install these followers on the push rod. Push rod will have a ball link installed like this. It's held on with a screw. Take the screw out, and it's just a standard rod. These followers both go on the long piece, not the short piece. They're just going to slip over like so. It's really hard to get these on. There's probably no way to get them on without taking that off. And then you're going to put the end back on, line up the hole, put the screw through it. Use a little CA to make sure this doesn't come loose. The way this tail rotor push rod works is it's two pieces. There's a receiver and a threaded end. For now, we're just going to thread them together. We're going to make an adjustment on this length after the whole boom's put together and the servo's in place. For now, just thread it into one assembly, and this is ready to install. So for installing the tail rotor push rod on the tail boom, you're going to do it so that the connected portion faces the front of the model. You want to slip one of the supports on first. Then you want to take the horizontal brace clamp, which is also the rear boom support bracket. And you want to slip that over the tail boom next. You'll have to spread it just a little bit for it to fit. And then you're going to put the second push rod support, because the way this is going to line up, one's going to be before it and one's going to be behind it. We'll actually tighten these up after the servo's in. Now we're going to make up the tail boom supports. You want to push the bridge supports over each one of these first, because once you glue the ends on, you're not going to be able to get those on. We've got these 4 metal ends. We're going to attach them to the end of the carbon with epoxy. You can use probably use CA or JB Weld, something that will hold them, because they are subject to vibration. Okay, here we got the first 2 glued on. At this point, it really doesn't matter which way they're turned, or you don't have to worry about that. When you put the other 2 on, though, this is going to be critical. You got to get this right, and I'll show you how to line them up. The way the boom supports mount to the model, both of these ends have to be parallel to each other. So an easy way to do that is to take the spacers that are going to be used later for the mounting them on the chassis and just bolt them between the 2 ends. The 2 we just glued on go on first. That's going to hold the rod position. Then as we install the ends on the other side, we're going to do exactly the same thing. That's going to make sure that when you lay these flat, that the rods are exactly parallel and the ends are parallel to each other as well. Alright, here you can see how I've got this set up. Both ends have the spacers between them. The rods are flat on a surface, and this is just gonna we're gonna let the 2 new ends set for a while so that the adhesive sets up. But this will make sure both ends are parallel to each other, so you won't have an alignment problem when you try to install them. So now the tail boom can be installed into the chassis that we put together earlier. Where you're going to align it is so that this gear aligns with the tail rotor drive gear, and basically it's going to fit so. And then we're going to connect the tail boom in with 8 8mm bolts. And here's the tail boom mounted. You can see the 4 bolts in place on this side of the chassis, as well as the 4 bolts on the other side. These can all be thread locked and fully tightened in, because this is in its permanent position. Okay, next we're going to install the boom supports. Before doing that, to simplify things, go ahead and connect the boom support brace in the center. There's really no wrong way to install this. The way I've done it is the plate goes on top. You use 8mm bolts with lock nuts, and in the set screws, which are going to fix it into position, I've set so they go towards the bottom or outside of the model. That way I can set these later. The actual position of this and spacing we aren't going to set until it's all mounted and on the model, so don't tighten any of these pieces up yet. So the front part of the boom supports are going to mount onto the rear of the chassis frame, and the holes just below the tail rotor servo cutout. You're going to use these long 25mm bolts. They go through the boom support, through these triangular supports, and into a central frame spacer. It's just like the other spacers we used earlier. It's threaded for 3mm. So you bolt on both sides of this. Again, the support brace here is going to float for now. Don't fully tighten these until we put the back part of it on. So at the rear of the boom support braces, we're going to mount them to the boom support clamp that we put on the boom earlier. They're going to bolt in back here with self-threading screws. You want to use CA on those because they're going into plastic. So you can see they're connected in the front and onto this support brace at the back. You can fully tighten all this up now because it's in the position it's going to go. We're not quite ready to position this boom support bridge. We'll do that shortly. To wrap up the tail boom, you want to put the the bolt through the top of the tail boom support clamp with the lock nut on it, and don't fully tighten it, but you have to put that on first. Then put the horizontal fin over the top of it. It threads in with two 8mm M3 bolts. Use CA on those, fully tighten it up. And then you can sight down the boom here. This is not going to show well. But basically what you want to do is make sure that this fin is horizontal or parallel to the ground or to the rest of the model. And then you can tighten up this bolt on the top. It's a lock nut, so it doesn't require any thread lock. Last thing you want to do is position the boom support bridge. The way I normally do this is the center plate has slots in it. I slide it as far down as it'll go towards the chassis, because that's the wider parts where you're going to see the most vibration. And then tighten the bolts on the bridge, and then tighten the two set screws underneath using CA. Be really careful with these because you're threading up against graphite, and if you over tighten them you'll crack it or damage it, and then later that'll cause you a problem. Alright, again, we're not going to do anything with the tail rotor push rod supports until we get the servo in and get everything lined up, but that completes the tail boom assembly. Next we're going to work on the tail rotor.